There are great projects we can do everywhere. The world is full of need. And we can run in and put Band-Aids on things everywhere. But we want to be part of a bigger strategy that makes disciples. Then I believe our helping is most effective.
Community service or just preach the gospel? How should your church be thinking about missions? Hello and welcome to Ministry Now, a resource from the faculty at Southwestern Seminary helping you live your calling in an ever-changing ministry landscape. I'm Katie McCoy, and today we're joined by Dr. Dean Sieberhagen. Dr. Sieberhagen serves as Associate Professor of Islamic Studies here at the Fish School of Evangelism and Missions at Southwestern Seminary. Dr. Sieberhagen, thanks for coming on Ministry Now.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Give us just a little bit of an overview of your own missions experience.
So I got to serve in Central Asia for 13 years with my family in a Muslim context and in a context where we had to think about how do we look after the needs that are here? We had a humanitarian aid company that looked after needs of people, and it was always a challenge of how do we do that but also preach the gospel.
So you had a humanitarian company that served as kind of the springboard for your missions work. How did that work?
So you weren't allowed to be a missionary there. So, but the country had a lot of needs. It had just come out of the Soviet Union, and we were able to meet some of those needs because of our resources. They varied from working in prisons and orphanages to teaching English to setting up medical clinics to developing a sports league. I taught business. So various needs that they had, we tried to meet, and that gave us a presence there.
That's interesting because it brings up a question that a lot of people have related to missions. When we think about missions, we think about something that we do, some type of activity. And of course, for most people in the churches, missions tends to have a short-term context. They may take a summer mission trip.
Right.
And then, of course, there are those who believe they are called to the mission field, so they are over there for anywhere from 1 year to a lifetime. So how do we know whether or not we're actually doing missions? Because all those things that you described, community service projects, there are secular organizations that do those as well. So what makes it missions?
Right. So we believe in the approach that Jesus took, incarnational approach. So to missions, we want to share the gospel in the most culturally appropriate way that they are able to understand and receive Christ. To do that requires long-term investment. Someone has to live there, learn their language, learn their cultural worldview, understand how they would receive the type of gospel we're presenting, and how do we need to think about how they understand the concepts we use and so on. So we need long-term people to live. That's what we did. We learned language, we learned culture. But at the same time, they're not just ready to listen to you. They have real needs that you can meet. And so often short-term teams were very valuable. In fact, we had a short-term team every month of the year.
Really?
Come and join us in our goal. But our goal, even for that short-term team, was to partner with us in making disciples of these people. Making disciples within their language and their culture, but true, biblically faithful disciples. And so we were there learning language and culture so that we could walk that road with them. But short-term teams would come in and help us meet a lot of needs, which opened doors for us to do that. So our goal, though, was always sharing the gospel and making disciples. We can't define missions without that. So just helping somebody and just saying God loves you, that's not good enough. That may be a nice thing to do, but that's not our definition of missions.
So relate that for the local church ministry that is going to be putting together maybe short-term mission trips. Right. And there seems to be kind of one of two, not extremes, but at least mindsets. That one mindset says that they, with very little understanding of the culture or knowing the language, will be able to verbally proclaim Christ and see people come to faith in him and then head back home. The other says that they're going to go do some community service projects, perhaps just be present in the neighborhood and never really be part of a ministry, but leave with saying, we want you to know that God loves you and we are praying for you, that type of thing. Is there a middle, or is there something that you take from both of those approaches for the layperson who's going to be going on a short-term mission trip?
Right, so our approach tends to be what we call a prioritistic approach, which means the gospel is the priority. There must be a declaration of the gospel in such a way that they can respond. So it means it's culturally appropriate and understandable, but the gospel, and they can respond. Now that's the priority, but to get there, you may need to meet needs in which a local church from here can really help you with that. And so Madagascar is a good example. We've been partnering as a seminary with Madagascar. Well, in the beginning, we just had to find these people and who they were and find believers. In the beginning, we focused on storing the gospel and just really presenting the gospel. We didn't really fully understand a lot of their needs at the time, but we knew we've got to have some of them who know Christ as Savior to help us.
How did they respond to that, knowing that you weren't coming in just kind of blind?
Well, they were interesting because they were so unused to foreigners. So they're a little more different. They're not the typical missions place today where there's exposure to media in the world. They were very village, no water, no electricity. I mean, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So they were so remote that we were a novelty when we came in. And so there was this interest, we were interesting. And so there was a desire to listen. And we tried to come along and say, look, we've heard about you and we want to come and see who you are. And we'd like to tell you who we are. But we'd also like to tell you stories about God if you'll listen. And they're a very God-active environment. The spirit world is active. So it was easy in that context. In a more resistant, like where we lived for 13 years in Central Asia, part of getting to the gospel was meeting needs and showing that you really cared about them. So that's why we worked in orphanages and prisons, and we had disaster relief and various things. And so churches would come and help us. So a church might come, for example, and help us run a soccer camp in a village where we invite all the kids in and we invite the parents, but the people from the church who run that soccer camp, they can't speak the language. They don't know the culture. They just do a great job loving the kids and playing soccer. So they might go away thinking, well, how did we make disciples? How did we share the gospel? Well, the point is not that they did, but did they open a door for the gospel? And that soccer camp did, because now we, the missionaries, as well as the local believers, have brand new relationships in all the families of the kids that came to that soccer camp.
Okay, so let's dive into that. Let's kind of drill down into that, because what you just said was a distinction between did you share the gospel or did you help create an environment where the gospel could be shared?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That's the distinction. Where you can, absolutely share the gospel. And sometimes that can happen. But the most important question you want to ask yourself is, will this short-term trip result in the gospel being shared? Whether we get to or not is not so important. Maybe the local believers or the missionaries will, but will we create doors for the gospel through this trip? If you can't say yes to that, then I'm questioning whether it's really a mission trip. You can build an orphanage, because the building of that orphanage will result in the gospel being shared. Even if you don't do it, that's fine. So that's an important question to ask. If we do this trip, will it result in the gospel being shared, even if we don't do it personally?
So we live in a very technologically connected world. We can transfer money with a few clicks of a button on an app. We can FaceTime and Zoom in all the way across the world. So why would it still be important? Is it still important for a group of Christians from America to physically travel to another country and be there working alongside the missionary? Wouldn't a better use of resources be save the thousands of dollars of airfare and hotel stays and just hire people to build an orphanage, hire people to do soccer camps, and assist you financially in the long-term work? What's the benefit of having believers there who don't know the culture or the language?
So the answer for sure is both and. Should you support the work financially there? Yes. Should you send resources? Should you use technology? Yes. But it also requires a human face-to-face. There's nothing that can replace that life on life, humans sitting at a meal. Most of these cultures are very hospitality-based cultures, where the most effective sharing happens sitting at a table, drinking tea, and opening up your hearts. That doesn't happen easily via digital technology. It can happen, but it's both and. It needs the people there. So why a short-term trip? Because you're a new voice. Yes, the missionary been speaking, but you're another voice saying the same thing. They're seeing it in another way. They're seeing another real-life person who believes this. Also, it's a massive encouragement to the missionaries. When you are doing it, when the missionaries ask a team to come and help, and you take the trouble to come, the value of encouragement is hard to estimate on that. It's so encouraging. We were always so encouraging that these teams were willing to come and work with us to reach these people. But the other big part of it is, I had a large team of over 30 people on my team. At least half of them had come on a short-term mission trip. They'd visited us before. They'd drunk that tea. God began to work in their heart to say, you need to be one of those who goes and learns that language and learns that culture. We still have over 7,000 unreached people groups. 7,000 that need more people to go. Often a short-term mission trip is a catalyst for that. You go, you talk, you taste, you see, you touch, and it's just that thing that says, okay, this is where I belong. This is where I belong.
Yeah.
So, but the answer is both and. We need to use all the digital distance stuff we can, but we definitely still need people to go on trips, short-term and long-term.
You mentioned looking at ministries internationally and the community service projects that they would do and questioning, is this a valuable use of time? Will it lead to the gospel being shared? How is that something that you can gauge? How could a church ministry gauge that from thousands of miles away?
So the easy part would be, is there a missionary there? That's number one. And then to ask that missionary, tell us how you get to gospel. How do you get to making disciples? Let them tell you. If they're with the IMB, that should be pretty clear. They should have a strategy that they can share with you and say, we want you to come and be part of us for a short-term trip because you're going to help with this strategy. So they should be able to tell you that. If there are no missionaries but just local believers there, then you've also got to ask them that question. It's saying, how will this help you make disciples? How will this help you share the gospel? And you want them to really think that through, and there to be some accountability for that.
And they have a plan of how they're going to use
They have a
their
plan
resources.
of how they're going to use that. And so, and you know, it's not perfect, but that's an assessment you need to do when you come back from that trip, is to say, how do we feel that as a result of our trip, the gospel, new doors for the gospel have been opened or more discipleship taking place? Did we make any difference in that area? That ought to be an evaluation question you ask.
What stands out to you in your ministry, either what you've seen or participated in, of a ministry that did this well and used the community service as a springboard to sharing the gospel?
Well, what I found was a church that allowed the people on the field to drive the agenda, and they didn't just do a once-off. There's a danger of what's called missions tourism. Oh, this year we'll go to Haiti. Next year we'll go to Turkey. The next time to China. No, the most effective was a church who said, God's called us to you, your team, and your people. We want to serve you. So we're not going to other places. Every year we want to come to you, and we want to help you make disciples. That was by far the most effective thing that we saw happen. In fact, even locals started to recognize them more because they came every year. And there was always an understanding from the local people, oh, these are these people that come and help us every year. Wow. And so I think that's important to be field-driven and invest in don't do missions tourism. Invest in an area God's talking to you, somewhere where the gospel is yet to be, I think, unreached would be my priority. And just let the field help you say, okay, come here. This year, we want you to do a sports camp. Next year, do you have any business people that could help teach small business here? The following year, do you have anybody with medical experience that could help us do that? I mean, just let the field help you with the needs that you come and meet, because as you've now built relationship with that team, now you've got trust that everything we do is part of making disciples. Everything we do is now helping. There's a deep trust develops between the missionaries and the church that's coming regularly.
And then with the community too. So in a way, what you're saying is for a church to find a missionary. So let's say find a missionary serving with our International Mission Board and kind of adopt their ministry.
Yep, I would say so. I would say you should do that. We talked about adopting an unreached people group before, but I would even say these days adopt an IMB missionary.
That's a great idea.
Yes, adopt it and say to them, you could put a time, you say the next 5 years, we want to give you the next 5 years. How can we help you?
And build relationships between the church and that missionary and investment in the community.
Yes. So our church is doing that with Madagascar with a guy called Mamtina. Now, it's very important to partner. He's taught us about meeting needs because in his context in Madagascar, if you help one person, you have to help everybody. I said to him one time, should we bring some golf shirts, polo shirts, or some shoes for some people? He said, well, not if you can't bring hundreds. Because if you give to one, you have to give to everybody. That's the expectation in the culture. So it matters to say, we would have made a big mistake to bring just 10 pairs. Who do we give them to? And then we create a fence in the people we don't give to. Okay. So that was a case of really wanting to meet needs, but letting the field people, the people who live there, tell us, do it in this way. So right now it's happening where a church, Dr. Queen's church here, has sent them funds, and they're actually doing food distribution. There are villages there villages that are starving. There's a terrible drought. Okay. They have bought local food from local businesses, which supports those businesses, not in bringing it in, but locally. And they're distributing to a whole village so that everybody's getting food.
Such a great point, because one of the points people try to help poverty, for instance, and instead of patronizing a local business or local restaurant or local producer, they try to bring in with their solutions that they have locally within their context, and it ends up harming businesses there.
That's right.
So it takes someone on the ground to be able to see that full picture.
That's right. There's a great book folks should read if they're interested called When Helping Hurts. You can Google that. It covers those issues. The term is field-driven. Be field-driven, whether it's the IMB missionary or the local pastor that you trust. Let them drive the projects that you do. Let them say, come and build this orphanage because this will really lead to discipling and the gospel being shared. Okay, we're trusting you. If you say build an orphanage, that's what we're going to do because we trust that that's the best help towards making disciples.
Sounds like if we could kind of put it all under one big umbrella, it's taking an approach to missions in which your church partners with a much bigger focus for that people group, that city, along with that missionary, not necessarily participating in just an activity. That's
how I would put it. Yes, be part of the bigger strategy that is geared towards making disciples. There are great projects we can do everywhere. The world is full of need, and we can run in and put Band-Aids on things everywhere. But we want to be part of a bigger strategy that makes disciples. Then I believe our helping is most effective.
Dr. Sieberhagen, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us as always. We want you to know about a very special event coming up in September. On September 27th through 29th, we are having our first Ministry Now conference here at Southwestern Seminary. If you want more information about that conference and everything that we'll be covering in it, go to swbts.edu. You can also go there to find out information about our classes, including our 8-week module courses happening all throughout the year. And don't forget to find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is Ministry Now reminding you to live your calling. We'll see you next time.